Hi, it's Laura. Welcome back to my new little series that is designed to help you get started in your vintage selling business. Today, I'd like to talk about the different platforms that you can choose to get started on. If you've ever watched my videos before, you know that I sell on eBay, Etsy, Whatnot, and Depop. I have also sold on Poshmark in the past, and I sold on Instagram, but not in the way that we know Instagram selling to be today. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. There are so many platforms that you can try and get started on. I'm going to focus primarily on the ones I just mentioned, but there's also platforms like Mercari and Grailed and Vinted and 4 billion that I don't engage with. So, in my opinion, by far, in fact, no, before I tell you what I think is the easiest platform, I'm gonna caveat with this. All of these sites are incredibly similar in that they're all going to have a very similar structure, right? Title, description, drop down menus for different characteristics of your item, price, shipping, publish it, right? That's essentially the setup for everything. Also, you're going to have to go in and like create your account if you don't already have one on these different sites. I am so sorry that I don't have any good advice for you on that. I haven't set any of these things up in 422 years, and I do not remember anything. What I do know is that you do not have to have a business name or a business tax ID or anything like that. You can sell as an individual person slash sole proprietor. So like, even though my shop name is called Vintage Pussycat most places, it's all set up just with my social security number and my name as like the business information, and that's acceptable, and you don't have to worry about any setting up with LLCs, just slow down, okay? Because you could do this for a week and be like, fuck this, I'm out, and never do it again. But also you can continue forever just doing it under your social security number as your individual sole proprietorship. And I think that for a lot of like small sellers, I think that like once you get into, if you get into anything like warehouses, employees and things like that, that's a whole different ball game because maybe you have to worry about insurance, like liability kind of insurance, whatever. We're going to slow this way down. It's just you. Okay. So with all of those things in mind, assuming that you go in, you set up your account, probably easy peasy. Where do you want to start selling? In my opinion, the absolute easiest place to start selling as a new person is going to be Poshmark. I know that I don't sell there anymore, so you may think that that's a weird thing for me to recommend, but the reason I think that Poshmark is the easiest is because of the way they handle shipping and because of the way they handle returns. Depop and Mercari are kind of similar, but Poshmark is just even more simple than they are. I'm going to do my best to keep this incredibly broad strokes because I keep re-recording this and going into way too many specifics, and I think it's better to make individual videos about the intricacies of each site. So for now, I'm just going to say with Poshmark, they kind of take care of shipping for you, especially if you're doing clothing, which again, I assume kind of that you are if you watch me. On Poshmark, you can ship up to 5 pounds and it's a flat rate. It doesn't matter if it's a 3-ounce handkerchief or a 4-pound winter coat, it's all the same price. The customer pays that price. And then Poshmark emails you your shipping label for you to print off and stick on your package and take to the post office. As far as returns, they essentially give the buyer 3 days from the time of delivery to raise any concerns, to try and initiate a return, essentially. And after those 3 days, too bad, so sad, you don't get to complain anymore, right? There's going to be exceptions, but they're going to be rare, okay? That's why I think Poshmark is the easiest. You're going to, or have already heard a lot of things about Poshmark and like sharing and Posh parties and Posh Live and whatever. Don't worry about that, okay? We'll talk about that in the Poshmark video. In my opinion, a lot of that is bullshit. Some of these apps, Poshmark, Depop, maybe Mercari, I don't know, but a big part of the way that they function is they are trying to keep you engaged in activity on the app all the fucking time, okay? Most of these selling apps will prioritize new sellers. So if you go on, you create a new account, you're just getting your new items listed, they're going to bump you up in the algorithm and show you to customers sort of more in the top of the search results, because they want to hook you into selling and keeping engaged in selling activity on there. So it is a benefit, because even though as a new seller you have no reviews, you have no history, you have no reason for customers to trust you, all of these platforms do kind of say, hey, look at this new person, and they throw you out there. So sometimes it does work in your benefit that way. So that's Poshmark as a start. Depop, I don't think that Depop is a great place to start off, even though, you know, their structure is similar to Poshmark in that it's pretty easy to stick items in as a listing. I will say Poshmark gives you like a lot of photos. You can enter, I think, like 20 or something photos on Poshmark, which I think is great. And Depop only lets you have like 8 photos. When it comes to putting photos on a site, most places are going to recommend to use all of the photo capacity that you are allowed to use. So I know, I forget how many Poshmark is, 16, it's a lot. Poshmark is a lot. Depop is 8, Etsy is 10, eBay is like 24 photos right now, which is great. So try to use all those photo spaces if you're able to. There's a lot of ways that people come up with creatively to kind of take up some of those photo spaces. But again, we'll talk about that in future videos. Depop only lets you have 8 photos, so I kind of think that that's a little bit of a downside, especially if your item has any kind of flaws or any kind of details that you want to highlight. They also, their shipping is kind of easier, but they break it down. So whereas Poshmark says up to £5, one price, don't worry about it, Depop is like, gives you shipping label options. It's like small, medium, and large, and they kind of give you examples of what a small item, medium item, large item would be. But I think that if you're unsure of shipping and knowing what things weigh and whatever, it can feel a little bit more confusing. Also, Depop is just like, it's very dead for a lot of people, and I think it works better for a very specific demographic of clientele. It's a very young demographic on there for the most part. There are certain aesthetics that work better on Depop than others. You know, I don't know if I'm the best person to give advice on how good Depop is. I don't do well on there, even when I'm listing consistently. Depop is another one where they kind of want you to engage in a lot of activity that keeps you in the app constantly. And I don't do that anymore on any of these platforms because I'm not doing that. Also, fodder for future videos. eBay. So eBay is really like the big daddy of all of the reselling apps, right? And on the one hand, they're the best because they have the largest, by far, the largest active buyer base of any of these platforms. And I don't remember numbers, but it's like billions compared to like the million. You know, they have the most customer base by far. They are established, they're old school. However, they are also like, you know, your boomer parents, grandparents, great grandparents, I hope not. Anyway, if you're a boomer, I'm sorry, I mean it with love. But eBay was started in like 95 or something like that. And in my experience, as they like make changes to their platform, they kind of just keep sticking band-aids on things. And now you've got this like thick stack of band-aids, or like, you know, the landlord special paint with like 47 layers of paint over the light switch. Like that's kind of the way that I see eBay sometimes. They have like a bajillion item descriptions to like drop down, list, select, and all this kind of stuff. It can be confusing, but you're getting the most eyes of anything on your items ever. And you can sell whatever you want on there, like, you know, practically anything legal. Okay. But it is a little bit more confusing, I think, if you are brand new. I think that Poshmark is definitely the way to go. And then there's Etsy. So Etsy is, you're going to think like, oh, obviously Etsy is like the one that makes the most sense for vintage clothing, right? Yes and no. Etsy started off as the handmade and vintage marketplace, but there have been a lot of changes through the years. Etsy has investors and shareholders now that they want to keep happy. And the way that they prioritize things in the algorithm, I am learning a lot recently, is not super friendly to anybody who sells one of a kind items. And for the most part, vintage is one of a kind. There is some advice out there on how to sort of trick Etsy into thinking that it's not a one of a kind thing to game the system. I don't like the advice that's given on that, but that's also something we'll talk about in the Etsy video. But Etsy, as far as ease, it's pretty easy. There's the same thing. It's, title, item description, put in your photos. Etsy allows you to have a video, as does eBay, Depop. I don't know if Poshmark does. Poshmark does, I think. I have never tried sticking one in there, but I think they do. So most of these sites allow you to stick in a video. I don't do videos for the most part on my listings. They say that they are incredibly beneficial. I don't know. The times I have stuck a video in, I don't notice that it really makes any difference personally. But again, as a new person, I think don't worry about that right now, right? So, but Etsy does make it pretty easy to list. But again, you kind of have to know what you're doing as far as shipping. And for vintage, I would say that Etsy, it's also a little bit more important for you to understand. You want to be able to more accurately represent the era of your item, because you do have to specifically select the decade that your item is from. So there's that. Again, I was about to go into 700 more details about that another time. I talk about Whatnot a whole bunch on my channel here because it's easy content for me. And it's fun. I like Whatnot, but I do not think Whatnot is a good place for brand new sellers. I think it is a terrible platform if you don't know what you're doing. You have to be very well acquainted with shipping, I think, because Whatnot's shipping can become very complicated, and that's not Whatnot's fault. It's the nature of the type of auctions that they're doing. So I'm going to say for now, don't go anywhere near Whatnot as far as being a seller. It seems very exciting because people put out these videos that make it seem like, oh, I streamed for 8 hours and I got rid of everything and, I made $8 million. And like, yes, that happens to some people here and there, but it's not the norm. It's a lot of work, very little profit. You have to know about shipping. I wouldn't recommend Whatnot right now, but we will talk about Whatnot in one of these videos as far as more specifically than I usually do. And I'm going to say sort of the same thing. Poshmark has a Poshmark Live feature, which is also a live auction platform via Poshmark. I've never used it. I had already stopped using Poshmark before that feature was released. But I would imagine that it is also a lot more complicated than just straight up listing on Poshmark. From the things that I heard when they did first launch, shipping can also be complicated there, because one of the things that happens is you have people buying multiple items, and so it's easy to like go above the sort of weight thresholds and things like that, and that's when things can get a little complicated if you don't know what you're doing, right? So for now, stick to single items, and I do think Poshmark is best. Other platforms like Grailed, Mercari, the 8 million other ones that I don't know. Mercari, I think, is very similar to Depop in their shipping. They offer like tiers of shipping, from what I understand. Although Mercari just made some changes that might sound attractive to a new seller, but Mercari just made changes where the seller no longer pays any selling fees. So if you list an item for $10 and it sells for $10, you get $10. Pretty much the end of the story. The buyer is the person who pays the shipping, and they pay the transaction fees. I don't understand how this is supposed to work. I mean, I understand how it works, but I don't understand how this is supposed to help with sales. And I don't know enough about Mercari, so I'm not going to really discuss it. But because of the fact that they just made these changes, I would not recommend Mercari to brand new sellers at this time. I'll try and look into it more and see if it's something that sounds like it would be easier. Maybe I'll even try and like create a listing on Mercari. I don't know. I'm not super excited about the prospect of that, but for you, maybe I'll do it. So, and all the other things, I think that at the end of the day, a lot of these platforms are going to be similar. The last time I tried to list on Grailed was really focused more on men's fashion and like a specific aesthetic, like very like, I'm going to use totally wrong terms here, but like hype beast and like whatever, like a very specific fashion aesthetic and demographic. They may have changed some things. I think they started selling some women's clothing and stuff. I haven't been on there in a million years because it's just doesn't overall fit into what I do very well. So I sold a couple things on there, but whatever, it wasn't great. Also, as a brand new seller on Grailed, they required that all of my photographs include like literally a piece of paper with the date and my username or something, because I think they're trying to avoid people doing drop shipping. So for your first like 5 or 6 sales, you have to include that stuff. It was just annoying to me. I don't know, whatever. I didn't like it. I don't know if they still do that. So those are my beginning platforms. So short version, 16 minutes into this video, is I think that Poshmark is the best place to start if you're selling women's clothing. If you're doing something besides women's clothing, it gets a little more nuanced. But again, you're watching me, so I kind of assume that you're doing women's clothing, probably vintage. So I'm going to leave it there. And then my next video that I will do will talk about the specifics of listing on Poshmark and kind of how Poshmark works, because I feel like that'll take longer. And if you don't care about Poshmark, you don't want to listen to it. So that'll be my next video, but I hope that this was at least a little bit helpful. And I appreciate you watching this. And in the meantime, if you're like kind of waiting until I make something that's like a little bit more instructive per platform, maybe just get started going in and creating an account if you don't already have one, and then you've got step 1 down and under your belt. Okay, thank you so much for watching this. I hope that you found it helpful, and I will see you again soon.